This is Steel Sky, a third-person action-adventure designed for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, which puts a twist on what we currently call stealth. The core of our game is based around the idea of staying hidden in plain sight. To understand why the player needs to be hidden at all, first we must look at where the player is. Welcome to Madrid 2073. With technology advancing at an exponential rate, Spain is now leading the world in its civic freedoms and technological marvels. Madrid has become an icon of the modern-day world, having reduced crime to all-time lows and completely replacing their security forces with robotic drones. With humans removed from the threats of fighting crime in many of the more dangerous jobs, civilization can now fund even more time and resources into technological advances. Phones, currency, security, personal information, everything has become managed by the city-wide AI, all of which is now managed through the conveniently replaced SIM card system. All citizens have replaced the small aspect of their lives with a SIM card that is placed into the body, further creating the ease of access. Over time, citizens have become equally reliant on these SIM cards for everything, as every new model has more and more of the personal data stored and secured within. This has become the downfall of modern-day freedom, to the point that anyone with a chip or even a corrupt chip has become labeled a threat to the safety of Madrid. Police are becoming more and more hostile towards those that break the laws, whether deemed immoral or not. As more and more crime became legal, the order of society has broken down, leading to a very drastic change to the reaction of the police. Now any crime can be punished by termination of the individual. The media, now controlled, have manipulated the people to submit to this control under the guise of safety. You are Miguel Angel, a man who has risked all for your freedom. You have, through unfortunate events, come into possession of a chip owned by a police robot, allowing yourself free reign in society. However, unknown to the player, the chip was flawed, resulting in a downward spiral of events, leaving you with no other alternative than to access the black markets of Madrid. Here you will find what true freedom is and the cost that comes with it. Inside these black markets located within all the city districts, the player will find work, crime, misfortune, and hope. They will be able to drop off vital supplies for money, make contacts, and buy supplies to further their efforts to take freedom for themselves. These areas will be built with what looks like old torn pieces from previously destroyed buildings used to build stalls for the black market and some doors that appear barred off. The area will be a bit darker and out of the way, as the idea is for it to be out of sight of any security. In the markets, the player will have access to the fast travel networks between all other discovered market locations. With Madrid being broken into many districts, the player may find that utilizing a fast travel between markets can minimize many risks in the semi-open world levels. In fact, each district acts as its own unique level as well as its own open world design. In the heart of the city lies the high society, where security is at its peak. This district is the ideal society that pretends the entire city is. The buildings are advanced, streets are clean, well-tended gardens. Life is near perfect. That is not the case for the entire city, as much of its districts lie fractured and dying. In an attempt to segment the city, reduce crimes, and systematically tend to the city, walls have been constructed throughout Madrid under the guise of security purposes. Those in the lower class districts are well aware that this is really done to keep the poorer society locked away. As you move further from the inner city, this becomes more and more apparent as infrastructure, poverty, luxury, and well-being gradually change and get worse the further you go. Outskirts of the city will have collapsing or run-down buildings. Streetlights, benches, even cars will become the victims to rust. Sickness can be seen in the streets as those forced to live in these areas are unable to seek help. Many roads, walls, and buildings will be broken down, crumbling, or clearly put together with whatever materials were available at the time of building, much like a hut built from junk parts. It will also help to show the player that people really don't have much. While the game does take place in the future, we don't want it to look too futuristic or too out of the box. Besides the higher quality of the city, we really want it to look similar to how it does today. We use actual research and map representations of the city of Madrid and use the Unreal Engine to bring out our futuristic dystopian twist to the Spanish city. From everything to the existing buildings in Madrid for a more realistic approach to a new architecture, whether it be of Spanish inspiration or of our own dark blueprints. People who have seen the skyline of Madrid will be able to see a few familiar sights and recognize some areas, but they might be surprised by how many changes occur over the years. Using accurate distance, roads, and mapping of the city as representation with our own parameters to have the game not feel too open but to still have an enjoyable amount of freedom while being controlled by robotic oppressors. The world we built was made from real situations and real issues. Our designs are based off all aspects of Madrid, from the spires of the rich to the extreme ghettos of the hopelessly poor. The real-world inspirations of tragic livings and complete disregard can be seen throughout Madrid both in reality and in Steel Sky. Many of our stories, environments, art designs are entirely focused around real-world situations. Each district will have its own unique feel to it as the living conditions change for the social class that lives in each district. We wanted to use a darker color palette for the scenery and art in the game to evoke a more serious, intense tone when out of the safe zones. The roads will be extremely dim lit, especially in the lower areas like the slums and the black market. Madrid, on top of also looking, will also sound unique. Each section of the city will have its own slight differences in audio to make a living world. Utilizing the latest version of Pro Tools in Ableton Live, we will create every sort of sound and musical score to drive the immersion of Steel Sky. The lower class areas will have a more industrial feel to its audios, whereas the slums will have a more urban feel along with sirens. In lower class districts, the sounds of gunfire and sirens can be heard with a general feel that the area is grungy. More in towards the main city, we want to use smooth colors that have a very standard feel to them and more brightly lit signs and lights to show a very clear difference between the living conditions and areas themselves to help again relay the government is not showing much care for what's going on in the country. The buildings are clean and have a contemporary appeal. Streets are at a constant state of repair, and even sounds of the city sound peaceful and at rest. Even security robots and cameras in these districts are victims to the lack of compassion from the government. While it will become very apparent that the high-class population will have the best of the best when it comes to security and everyday living, the slums will never have such luxury. Which brings us to the security of each district. Each tier of society will have different levels of security, the most prominent of which will be the variety of police robots as well as security cameras and their functions. As mentioned before, the lower class districts will have old rusty robots that have bare minimum programming, making them slow and clunky. This also makes them predictable and relatively easy to outrun or be tricked and led into a trap. Madrid's narrow alleyways and roads throughout the sprawling city will allow for many possible routes and actions, including the option to lead police down these alleyways to be killed and out of sight and out of mind of the people. The lower districts will have these more broken down looking robots to help support the idea that the government is ignoring the situation and doesn't care for how things are dealt with there or make it of any importance. The main focus will be to keep up the aesthetic appearance in the higher class areas looking advanced and well taken care of. The player will have to adapt as much as technology has if they're going to make it to the center of the city. As conditions in each district improve, the closer they are to the center of the city, so will the security. In these fringe districts, you will see the newer models of police and more cameras. The police will have several models, each corresponding to the status of the area they patrol. However, the better they are, the more dangerous a threat they become. In this case, their AI makes them more dangerous. The newer the model, the faster robot, the smarter they are, and the highest models even have the ability to work together. These advanced robots will be able to chase after Miguel much in the same way that the player is able to free run. This has made them all the more deadly with the ability to coordinate together to trap the player in and eliminate them. In order to escape, the player will be forced to use the environment to their advantage, being able to scale fences, quickly leap over small obstacles, and free run throughout the city. Thanks to the agricultural design of Madrid and the access of pathways, the player will never be short of options, as well as each of the options the player has will be represented by unique animations specifically designed for the action. Miguel is no athlete, and our animations will show this. He can perform basic free running skills but nothing special. This means that his actions will be blunt, unrefined, and even panicked at times. When running from the police, Miguel will be able to throw trash cans, boxes, any object that he can move to create an obstacle for any pursuer to push through. With the over-the-shoulder third-person camera, the player will always be able to see what options they have, as well as better view of their path. They can also use the system to check around corners and over ledges to see if their path is safe. Though most of the police will simply brute force their way through these obstacles, it can buy precious time for Miguel to escape. In events where the player is detected and being pursued, the player's animations will represent this as well. If the police have a line of sight on the player, Miguel will move more erratically. However, if the player is able to evade the police and they lose track, then Miguel will enter more of a stealth stance. In this case, the police will begin to scan the area to find the player, and the player will have to escape the scene, as well as insert a new chip without being seen while it loads in. While being unseen, Miguel will try to remain quiet and stay close to the wall, as well as stay low to the ground. In general, the animations represent the actions of an average man acting in panic to a not-so-average situation. In the event that the player has no chips remaining or can completely escape being tracked, they will be able to return to the nearest black market location for safety and supplies. These markets will be the only place that Miguel is ever truly safe, as crime-riddled as they may be. This is because, unknown to the main character at first, he's being hunted. This is the introduction of the Detective AI, a prototype variant designed specifically to track down Miguel. This character will act as the main antagonist of Steel Sky, as well as the largest threat to the player. Throughout the game, while Miguel tries to track down a SIM card that will allow himself permanent freedom, the Detective AI is also on the move. This AI will be constantly tracking down the player, piecing together the player's crimes, adapting and learning. With absolute authority, this AI will be doing anything and everything possible to stop the player, before the player's actions become a national crisis. The detective is a persistent threat throughout the game, within gameplay cutscenes as well as several key points of the game being unavoidable. This AI will constantly adapt how the player acts within the game. If the player frequently commits crimes or kills innocent civilians, the detective will adapt to become more hostile and generally become more aggressive. On top of the threat that this character already poses, if the character is found by the detective, then it will ruthlessly chase the player until Miguel is eliminated, or the player is able to lose line of sight. If the detective AI finds the player, it will call any nearby police to help search for Miguel. The detective AI will have the most distinct features from the other AI, as he is much different from them. The biggest issue that this character presents is that it can remember you. No matter what chip the player has equipped, the detective AI will always recognize the player. This adds an extra layer of tension as the player must always keep an eye out for the detective. Even if they are perfectly blended into society, the player must be careful not to waste valuable chips if the detective is nearby. Steel Sky's chip mechanic is the core of the story, as well as the gameplay. Utilizing a radio wheel to rapidly equip and change between the various chip types will allow the player to constantly have control over the ability to hide within the crowds and potential abilities each chip may have. With access to different chips, the player should always have options. Every chip will have its use, even if it's minimal. However, one of these chips will be the corrupt chip. If the chip becomes corrupt, it will be traceable, meaning that the police and security as a whole will be able to track down the player. This may result in a death or may be used as a way to lead security away from their patrol routes and potentially give opportunity to gaining a police chip. If they are able to acquire a police chip, the player will be able to bypass security checkpoints or even walk right through them. However, they may be tasked with performing actions of a police robot, which may often challenge the player's moral codes. With the standard chip will be the most common chip, which will help the player to remain hidden within plain sight, while the speed pass chip will act in the same way with the exception that you will no longer be randomly scanned by security forces. The government and logic chips may be very rare or hard to acquire, but they both serve as valuable assets to the progression of the game. A government chip will allow access to high society located within the center of the city, as well as limited control over local security. The construction chip is a generalized worker class chip, which allows access to any work area and their assets. This will be very useful in gaining supplies that may be valuable to the black market and other contacts that the player will encounter, whereas the logic chip serves to allow access to the security as well, but to a much more higher degree. These chips will allow access to security doors, camera functions, police patrol routes, and other valuable assets via the hacking mechanics that this chip allows access to. With the logic chip equipped, the player will be able to hack into security terminals and local camera stations. These security terminals will enable the player to open doors to reach restricted sites, take camera control to avoid detection, and even local district security if you can access the correct terminals. Cameras will be a unique entity in the game with their own mechanic to manipulate. Security cameras will be stationary but can easily detect the player if they aren't paying attention. If detected, the player will have two options, either run from the police that will now be tracking the player, or the player can spray the camera with paint to avoid detection. If the player uses spray paint on the camera, it will then call all local police to the area to begin searching, but will not immediately detect the player. Steel Sky is a game that will test you as you deal with Miguel's problems in the futuristic city of Madrid, where every corner could be your last with a detective behind you and never knowing when he will appear. Do you rely on switching chips on the run, or do you free one your way across town to lose them? Or do you just hack the environment around yourself to make a clean getaway blending into the crowd? Either way, you decide how to avoid getting caught. How will you overthrow the government and get your freedom back from the robots? How do you overthrow Steel Sky?